All right, we're back here in Prague on July 22nd, 2017. We're going to talk about the effects of the NIBIRU flyby, Planet X, Wormwood, the destroyer, and how to prepare for it. First, the effects. There will be iron oxide covering all the waters of the planet, fresh water and salt water both. That will take days to dissipate. I don't know how many days, but days, possibly weeks to dissipate. We could have winds when the jet stream comes to the surface of the planet. In fact, this happened here in the Czech Republic, what was that, about 10 years ago? When that forest got wiped out, those straight line winds. Anybody remember that? Come on, some of you do. Straight line winds, maybe 100, 150 miles an hour for a better part of a day. Rocks the size of automobiles and trucks, rocks the size of this auditorium. We don't know when they're going to hit or where, but that's happened before. Meteors, rocks, and I got a pointer, all right. Earthquakes. I'll tell you what the U.S. Navy said. I got this pointer, I might as well make use of it. New Madrid, Missouri is about right there. The most dangerous seismic zone on the planet. During the winter of 1811, 1812, there were hundreds of earthquakes. 3 of them made church bells ring in Philadelphia, right up here. That's about 700, 800 miles. Now, the energy from that seismic zone goes north and south and east very efficiently, does not go west into the Ozarks, because right here, there's a ridge of granite that acts as a blocking mechanism, as a shock absorber to absorb that energy. The U.S. Navy says that when this water, this inland sea is formed, the weight of the water will trigger 3 9-point-plus earthquakes, which would wipe out St. Louis, Chicago, Memphis, points east. A lot of devastation. There's going to be earthquakes all over the planet. I just happen to know about that seismic zone in North America. Volcanoes are going to kick off. Lots of volcanoes all over the planet. We may end up with 1 or 2 years with no summer, which would wipe out the growing season, of course. When these oceans come up, all the ports, most of the goods on this planet, automobiles, trucks, raw materials, petroleum, food, is moved by ship, by large cargo ships. No ports, there's no way to load and unload the ships, probably for years. What I tell my listeners on my radio show is the best thing you can do is to become part of a farm. We have an expression in the States we call a hobby farm. That's a farm where the fruits, vegetables, produce, milk, meat, whatever it might be, is meant for consumption on the premises, not to be sold to make a living. Obviously, if you have extra eggs, you sell your extra eggs, but primarily for consumption by the people on the farm. I recommend people have a 2-year supply of food. We can easily, if you're just starting out, by the way, learning how to garden, the first garden you plant is probably going to be a disaster. You can almost count on that. The second garden you plant, you may get enough food to get you by, maybe for a season. By the 3rd or 4th year of gardening, you're learning how to actually raise enough food successfully to get by for a full year. It's an ongoing process. I'm not a gardener, but the gardeners I know, whether they've been gardening for 5 years or 20 or 50 years, they're still learning. It's an ongoing learning process, being a gardener. You don't want to be within 100 miles of a major city, which would be basically 200 kilometers. You really don't. There's going to be hungry, desperate people looking to feed their children. Now, movies and novels focus a lot on healthy young males going about and causing problems after a disaster like this, which of course there'd be a lot of that. But I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, a 25-year-old mother with a hungry 1-year-old is going to be just as dangerous as a gang member. She will do whatever it takes to get food for her child. That's just human nature. People will do whatever it takes to feed their children. The farther away you are from a major city, the better off you'll be. That's pretty much a given. I mentioned earlier today the skills a person may want. Let's talk about emergency medical treatment skills. You've got first aid, CPR, that's cardiopulmonary resuscitation. You've got advanced first aid. Now in the States we have what we call emergency medical technicians, which is entry level. In the States it's 1 semester of college to become an emergency medical technician, EMT. 3 more semesters of college and you become what's called a paramedic, which is typically the highest level of training that you find on an ambulance in the States. Getting that training now while you can would be a really good thing. We have what appears to be the luxury of time. That might be a complete illusion. But we have what appears to be the luxury of time to learn CPR, to learn emergency medical treatment, and get the equipment and the supplies you need. Now, if you attempt to use medical equipment you're not qualified to use, you could hurt somebody or even kill them. Pretty serious stuff. So when you get your training, get medical equipment equal to your level of training. If you get more than you can use, more than you're qualified to use, it could be quite dangerous. And get lots of it. When these ports are closed, and it'll be on both sides of the Atlantic, when all these ports are underwater, there's not going to be spare parts anymore. That's not going to happen. The chance of the power grid surviving nationwide in the States or in many of these other countries is pretty minimal. And of course, I should mention there's other threats above and beyond, or in addition to, a NIBIRU flyby. One of the main ones, of course, being the consequences of a coronal mass ejection, which the worst one we're aware of happened in 1859, or a man-made EMP, electromagnetic pulse. The coronal mass ejection, quite frankly, could be far worse than a man-made electromagnetic pulse for the following reason. Electromagnetic pulse is strictly line of sight. It can't go around the surface of the planet, around the curvature of the Earth. Coronal mass ejection, if it's powerful enough, can go all the way around the planet, knocking out the power grid worldwide. In some ways, a nationwide or EMP to hit Europe or the United States or South America could in some ways be worse than the NIBIRU flyby. The estimates for the states, for the United States, is 9 out of 10 Americans would be dead in 1 year if we had a nationwide power outage. Think about it. Now, I don't know the numbers for Europe, but in the United States, 8% of the adults in the United States are diabetic. You've got another percentage of people who need heart medication, other people who need medication that keeps them from rejecting organ transplants. All kinds of life-saving medication that after electromagnetic pulse would be gone. The typical prescription is 30 days, which means the typical person has 15 days of their pharmaceutical products. Once they're gone, they're gone. I do recommend that people find alternatives to the pharmaceutical products. It may be herbs. It may be essential oils. It may be different things for different people. Maybe just stop taking them. Sometimes you're taking things you really don't need. But finding a way to have an alternative now, if you say you're taking 5 or 6 prescription items, if you go off those all at the same time, you're going to be hurting real bad. But if you incrementally get off them one at a time and substitute herbs or vitamins or essential oils, it'd be a lot more pleasant experience than trying to do it all at once. I mentioned earlier ham radio. Ham radio was first developed by these different governments to give people a way to communicate in the event of a crisis. Most people involved in ham radio, it doesn't matter what country it is, almost all of them have an interest in preparedness. One of the things I'm always being asked when I come to presentations like this, John, how can I find people of like mind, as we say, who know what I know, who believe what I know? In ham radio, you're going to find people like that. It doesn't matter whether it's Prague or London or Warsaw or New York City. People involved in ham radio, almost all of them are interested in being prepared. That's pretty much ubiquitous around the planet. It doesn't matter whether you're an 8-year-old boy or girl or an 80-year-old man or woman, you can be involved in ham radio and enjoy the hobby and have fun with it. Meet interesting people, learn how to do things you would never do otherwise. I mentioned earlier the difference between the way women approach preparedness and the way men approach preparedness. It's very predictable. The women tend to focus on the practical things. How in the world am I going to do laundry? How am I going to feed the kids? How am I going to cook? How am I going to keep the place clean? Men tend to focus on things like, how do I keep my car or truck running? How am I going to keep the water functioning? The things that men typically take care of anyway. But the two come together to make a whole. Learning what you need to do now, having the tools you need to do it now. Let's talk, for example, how do you do laundry? It wasn't so long ago when our grandparents, our great-grandparents, one full day a week to do nothing but laundry, right? One full day a week to do nothing but laundry for the family. Guess what? That's coming back, unfortunately. Now, in the States, up until the 1970s, we had wringer washers. There's no place to hook up hot and cold running water under 40 pounds pressure. There's no place for it. You simply put water in it, you turn on the agitator, it agitates till you turn it off, pour out the water, put in fresh water, agitate it till it's rinsed out, and so forth. Maytag used to be the really big manufacturer of these wringer washers. They can be reconfigured to work with a bicycle. There's lots of ways to get a wringer washer to work. They're very simple devices. And it's a lot easier to get a little bit of electricity than it is to get hot and cold running water under 40 pounds pressure. A lot easier. You'll get electricity before you'll get hot and cold running water under 40 pounds pressure. One of the things I learned in the Army was you're in civilization when you can take a hot shower. That's quite extraordinary in case you don't know it, being able to take a hot shower. And if you can do that, you're in really good shape. How do you prepare your food when there's no electricity, no natural gas? How do you clean your utensils? What do you do for toilet paper? Lots of questions there. What are the answers? The more you adopt that lifestyle now, the less of a shock it's going to be. Now, where I live in the Ozarks, there's two families competing who can be the most redneck. So one family, the 12-year-old daughter, killed a poisonous copperhead snake, and the parents cooked it and they ate it about 3 weeks ago, much to the shock of many of their neighbors. And so now the competition goes on to harvest and prepare and eat different critters that we find in our area. We got possums, we got raccoons, we got squirrels, deer, of course. Deer is a real big thing. But those skills that now are looked at as recreation, in the future would be a matter of life and death. To be able to hunt, to be able to fish. Gardening. Most people, for right now, gardening is a hobby. Gardening is a recreational pastime. It won't be in the future. It'll be something that would be a matter of life and death. Most people live in or near a major metropolitan area. That's the nature of our world, here in the first world anyway, in Europe and in the United States. And they live in and near these metropolitan areas because of employment. That's where the jobs are. I understand that. You drive 100 miles away from the city, you've got farmland. How do you become part of an ongoing farm? Well, you either buy a place or you become part of that farm. Farmers need two things. They need money and they need manpower for labor. Almost all farms, almost all the time, especially small farms, hobby farms, family farms. Perhaps you can find a family farm that would be glad to have extra labor on weekends. Be glad to have a little extra capital to buy an implement, a tool that they don't have now that they could really make great use of. Whatever it takes to become a part of a farm, preferably at a good elevation, has plenty of water, preferably a place where the winters aren't too bad. The higher elevation you go, the worse the winters get in general, and become part of it. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Finding a place like that and becoming part of it, it's going to be time-consuming. It's going to be difficult. You're going to be disappointed a lot until you find just the right place where you would be welcome. Most of you listening, wherever you might be, you're looking for a date. The only people looking for a date for the NIBIRU flyby, the only people are the ones who aren't living a day-to-day life of preparedness. Because once you are, a date becomes irrelevant. It no longer matters. The Navy veterans weren't given a date. They were told, gentlemen, you start a new life, you set up your hobby farm, you start your new career, and you just live your life. They don't think about a date. They don't worry about a date. It's not an issue. And I find this to be true pretty much all the time. That the men and women searching for a date, John, when's it going to happen? I know instantly that they're not prepared, that they're not living a life of preparedness. I know that instantly. There's almost no exceptions. Almost none. It's a harsh reality, knowing that our world, as we know it, could come to a crashing end. In 2012, there was a coronal mass ejection that almost hit Earth. Not quite, thank goodness. Now, the one that hit in 1859, it hit North America. We didn't have a nationwide power grid, obviously, but we did have, from the Mississippi east, where's this thing? From the Mississippi east, we had a telegraph system. And the telegraphs went all over, east, west, north, south. Those telegraph wires picked up, they acted as antennas to pick up that energy from the sun and direct it into the telegraph offices where they set fires. The barbed wire fences in the farmers' fields picked up that energy and set the fields on fire. The scientists say that when, it's not a matter of if, when another one that size happens to hit Earth, it'll knock out the power grid and the entire, half the planet at least, maybe the whole planet. One of the things you find out when you look into these power grids, whether it's Europe, South America, and North America, it doesn't matter. There's these massive multi-million-dollar transformers that make everything work. In the United States, there's about 19 of them. They're so big and so expensive and so reliable that they don't have backups. If they do need to buy a new one, right now, in 2017, from the moment they place the order until the time they take delivery, with everything working normally, is 1 year. When everything's broken, that's over. It's not going to be any delivery. It's not going to happen. I'm sure Europe's in the same situation with these massive, expensive transformers that control and make everything work. This planet has been through these cycles multiple times. We've been smashed down to the mud and recovered as human beings multiple times. This will be no exception. Who's going to survive? Young men and women, healthy young men and women who are on farms, are diligent and smart and have resources. They'll be the ones that will survive. Older folks, well, many of us will survive also if we're healthy and work hard and are diligent. But most people won't. 9 out of 10 people on this planet will die if there's a worldwide coronal mass ejection event. Very harsh reality. I want to open this up to questions. It's one of my favorite parts, and I told Alexander I would be up here half an hour, and we're coming up not too far from that. So questions from the audience, please. Are you scratching your head, or do you have a question? Alexandra? You want to do questions later when we have the panel? That's fine. That's fine. No problem.
What do you think about other countries?
Which other countries?
For example, Sweden.
Well, the farther north you are, the less problems you're going to have with the ocean, on one hand. Now, here's something I didn't mention now. The North Pole would be up here, above this, that's Canada. North Pole would be way up here. There's two North Poles. True North, which is where the axis of the planet is, and magnetic north. This has happened many times, and the scientists have figured this out. Magnetic north right now is moving towards Siberia. Magnetic north is in Siberia. For about 36 centuries, magnetic north moves in a certain direction, and then over a period of maybe 3 days to a week, true north catches up with it. That's the pole shift. That's the pole shift. And it's quite an event. Most of us will live to see at least most of it, maybe all of it. That's when these oceans come out of their basins, flooding these areas. Now, there's going to be two parts to the flooding. There's going to be the slosh, which could be 200 meters, and there's going to be the new ocean levels, which won't be that high, depending on where you are. I didn't mention where all the water is going to come from. This is pretty important. Now, here's South Texas, you got Mexico. You got the equator down about here. Sea level is measured at Cornwall, England. It's been that way for more than 200 years. They took a big rock at the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. They made a horizontal line. They said, this is sea level. When you get to the equator, the ocean is not quite 500 feet, about 490 feet above that horizontal line in Cornwall, England. Most of us, when we were kids, we would take a bucket of water, a full bucket, and swing it over our heads real fast, and the water doesn't come out, right? You did that. Well, that water at the equator is held in place by two things, the rotation of the Earth and gravity. Anything that disrupts the rotation of the Earth is going to disrupt that bulge of water. That bulge of water at the equator is tens of thousands of cubic miles of water. That's where the water is going to come from. It's all going to be displaced. When that happens, well, everything changes.
And John, the new equator, how do you think it will look like?
The equator?
The equator, you suppose that it will be altered, isn't it?
Well, there'll be a new equator.
Yeah, and
the old equator will be gone, and it'll be a new equator.
Yeah, and could you tell us here in Czech Republic, for example?
Well, we need to look at a globe. You may be far enough away from Siberia and Russia that you'll have a warmer climate here, I hope. It's going to be a 45-degree pole shift. I'm pretty certain of that. Without having a globe and looking at it, it's difficult to tell. exactly where Czech's going to end up. I hope you end up in a warmer climate. That would be a good thing. And you may be far enough west that would be the case. I hope so. And we don't have any control over it, obviously. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And there's going to be mass migrations. If you end up in an area where you have winter 6 or 8 months a year, you're probably going to want to get away from it and go south. That's the most likely scenario.
Could you say something how you expect the dust will be and the stones?
How the what would be?
Dust?
The iron oxide?
Yeah.
Well, it's mentioned in the Bible when Moses was leaving Egypt, how the water turned red. That was iron oxide. And Dr. Velikowski, as I mentioned earlier, he demonstrated by the ancient records that it happened all over the planet at the same time. You won't be able to drink that water. It'll make you real sick. And you'll have to have a source of water coming from underground, obviously, or a way to purify it if it's a surface water. Water's going to be a big thing real quick, by the way. Having access to pure drinking water is not optional. It's probably the largest reason right now, in July 2017, for infants dying on the planet is bad drinking water. It'll become even more so. Us people in the first world country, we're used to having easy access to pure drinking water. That won't be the case anymore. It will no longer be easy. There's an old saying around the prepper community, 1 is none, 2 is 1. Anything critical, like a water filter, get 2 of them. Anything critical, like a radio, get 2 of them. That's just a smart thing to do.
How do you think it will it be difficult to breathe? The dust should be covered.
You don't want to be breathing in iron oxide. You just stay indoors. If you have to go out, put some kind of filter or mask on. It wouldn't take much. A T-shirt would filter out enough that you'd be okay. If you stay out of it for 24 hours, you're probably going to be okay.
And stones?
The stones, well, they're going to hit. In fact, you may want to make a note of this. One of the largest meteor craters on the planet is about 10 miles from where I live. Crooked Creek Meteor Crater. Crooked Creek Meteor Crater. It's 3 miles across. It's massive. It's so big they didn't even know it was a meteor crater until they had aircraft that could fly over and say, oh, look at that. That's not normal. From the ground, you can't tell it's a meteor crater. But they're going to these rocks are going to hit all over the planet. We don't know where. If you're unlucky enough to be hit by one, you won't have to worry about it. It's going to kill you. But most people won't be hit by rocks. They will hit. They will do damage. And having some sort of underground shelter would just be a smart thing because we're looking at 150-mile-an-hour winds for at least a day. Possibly torrential downpours of rain. The rocks, like we said. The iron oxide. Having underground shelter would be a real smart thing if you can do it.
In the Bible and other scriptures, you can read about the 3 days of darkness, and that we should cover for our eyes so that our eyes could be damaged if we look outside.
Well, I think you're talking about the kill shot. And we may be looking at 150 degree Fahrenheit temperatures for a better part of a day, which for a healthy adult, if they got water, they're going to be okay. Children under age 5 and older people would probably die in that much heat for 10 or 12 hours. That's one of the possibilities. It is, absolutely. And protecting your eyes from the sun would be a smart thing also. There'll be things happen that you would never believe would happen during these events. Things, as we say, of biblical proportions. People will be desperate. Men, healthy men, typically not afraid of anything, would be falling on their knees and crying. That's how bad it will be.
And how do you prepare mentally or?
Well, this may be how I should end up this part of this, and that's spiritual preparedness. I address this on my radio show occasionally. I tell people the following. It's not my job as a radio talk show host to tell you what your spiritual belief should be, on one hand. On the other, I do feel a responsibility to let you know that that part of your life needs to be addressed, whatever it is for you, whatever it is. We know from the interviews and books of people who survived POW camps and concentration camps in World War II, the men and women who went into those camps with a strong spiritual foundation were far more likely to survive than the ones that didn't. The ones that didn't have a strong spiritual foundation, they're the ones that curled up into a ball and died and did not survive. So work on that. Begin that quest. It can and should become a lifelong quest, your spiritual preparedness. Finding peace with your Maker. Finding peace with your Creator. Whatever your verbiage is, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that you begin that quest. I've only been to one funeral for an atheist, and it was run by atheists, and it was the saddest thing I've ever been to. Very sad. And the atheists in control would not permit any mention of God, any prayers. They simply did not let it happen. It was a very sad event. I felt very sorry for the family of this gentleman. He was a friend of mine. So work on that. It may be Christianity, it may be Buddhism, it may be Native American spiritual beliefs, whatever it is. My friend Tim Spencer is a Native American, and he says quite frankly, John, I'm not a Christian. We have our own beliefs. And I said, Tim, I respect that. And they do. And whatever your beliefs might be, you folks listening and watching this DVD, this movie, maybe you've walked away from that for whatever reason. The beliefs you were born into as a family, in your family, the beliefs that you may have had at some point in your life you no longer do, the beliefs that you don't take seriously, maybe only on Sunday you think about them. Go back to your roots, whatever that is for you. It might be Judaism, it might be Christianity, it might be Buddhism, Native American, doesn't matter. Get involved in your spiritual life once again, incorporate it, and make it something you do every day. That's how to get through this. That's the single most important thing I can tell anybody, is to get your spiritual house in order. And I think we may be done.